God, it's easy for us to mouth words like that, even to sing them. But I pray, God, that you would help us to understand, God, what it really means to have a heart that worships you, a heart that delights in you, a heart that exalts in you, a heart that desires to magnify you. Because, God, we live in a world that tells us every moment of our waking day to make it about us, to make it about our needs and our desires and our wants. And God, there are so many, there are far too many, God, that are heeding that call to their detriment. So God, I pray that you would now grant us a heart that sees you for who you are, that you are treasure, that God, you are better, that you really are better than anything in this world. God, would you help us to see it? And I pray for that right now. Spirit of God, I know you're here. Holy Spirit, I pray, God, that you would now open our eyes that we might see. Lord, open our ears that we might hear. Open our hearts that we might believe. I commit every heart in this room, every heart that's watching, into your hands. Take it, God, and make it yours. In Jesus' name, amen. On January 9th, 2007, tech wizard Steve Jobs introduced at the Macworld Expo a new kind of phone. A phone that would do to smartphones what the Macintosh had done to personal computers in 1984. And this new phone, he said, is, quote, an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not three separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone. He continued, we're going to use the best pointing device in the world. We're going to use a pointing device that we are all born with 10 of them. We're going to use our fingers. And then he introduced a new word to our vocabulary, multi-touch, where one can now tap, pinch, swipe, drag, and press and hold the display screen for it to do the things they want it to do. The iPhone, a 3.5-inch high-resolution screen with no physical keyboard that would come to change the world as we knew it. Since its debut, 1.9 billion iPhones have been sold in 13 generations. And that's been followed by Android and other smartphones, giving people the most powerful handheld tool of social connection ever invented. In fact, Time magazine named the iPhone the single most influential gadget of all time. Of all time. Saying that it fundamentally changed our relationship to computing and information, a change likely to have repercussions for decades to come. The smartphone. A personal handheld device that is at once a computer, a camera, calendar, photo album, video player, DJ, gaming platform, reading tool, the internet, means by which we send emails and texts, GPS to navigate the streets, a portal to social media such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, not to mention making calls, which seems to be what it's least used for now. And that's just a fraction of what we look to our phones to be and do for us. Is it any wonder why they've become such an integral part of our lives? The smartphone has become such a part of our daily lives that it goes with us wherever we go, right? The office, the grocery store, the play date, the lunch date, trips and vacations, the bedroom, and yes, the bathroom. It's with us wherever we go, literally, and it's always within reach. It's there to wake me up in the morning, there to keep my appointments, there to capture my life in pictures and video, there to help me find the best deals, to hail a ride, to pay for stuff at the checkout stand, to monitor my health and do my checking, do my banking, and on and on and on. And with the proliferation of apps, there are now over 8.9 million apps available. 8.9 million apps. So whatever your need, literally whatever your need, whatever your desire, there really is an app for that. And couple that with software development that's improving at breakneck speed, our phones are more powerful and more useful than ever before. No wonder most people can't imagine life without it. Can you? Can you imagine your life without your phone? Can you imagine if you had to go through a day, just one day, without your phone? The thought alone causes many to break out in a cold sweat. The smartphone has been so integrated into every part of our lives that it's a constant companion. From the moment we get up, from the moment we open our eyes to the time we go to bed, we are glued to our phones. Check out some of these stats on smartphones. The average American spends 5.4 hours a day on their phones. 5.4 hours, 2.3 of those on social media. 43% of Americans say that their phone is their most treasured, valuable possession. 54% say that they panic when their cell phone battery goes below 20%. 41% of Americans say they experience severe stress less than 30 minutes after misplacing their phone. 80% say they check their phones within the first 5 minutes of waking up. Anybody? 67% say they have texted someone in the same room as them. 57% say they look at their phone when they're on dates, which I don't get. 54% use or look at their phones while driving. On that note, 26% of all car accidents today are caused by cell phone use. Did you hear that? And if you are one who texts and drives, listen to this. Assuming that a driver doesn't look up in the average time it takes to send a text, which is 4.6 seconds, at 55 miles per hour, you would have driven blindly the length of an entire football field. That is crazy. A couple more. This one's heartbreaking. 17% of parents said they spend more time on their phones than with their children. And here's a clincher. 75.4% consider themselves addicted to their phones. 75.4% of people surveyed admitted to being addicted to their smartphones. And this compulsive use of our phones has given rise to brand new terminology, such as nomophobia, which is the fear of going without your phone, which 66% of the population has. Textophrenia, which is the fear that you can't send or receive texts, and phantom vibrations. which is the feeling that your phone is alerting you when it really isn't. Anybody ever experienced that? I have. But these are actual terms in use now. Truth is, a lot of people today have an unhealthy dependence on their phones. A lot of us have an unhealthy dependence on our phones. I wonder how many of us in this room, how many of us watching are addicted to our phones. As beneficial as they are, as helpful as they are in navigating life in this digital age, and they are helpful. There's so many benefits to having smartphone technology at our disposal, but at the same time, we cannot dismiss, we cannot turn a blind eye to the dangers and the downsides that come with our dependence on them. And guys, those dangers are real. And that's what I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about these things. I want to talk about our smartphones and how our dependence on our phones is changing us. And much of what I'll be sharing today comes from a book by Tony Reinke called 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. And I'd encourage you to grab a copy yourself and read it. It's convicting. But I want to share some of the ways the author says the phone is changing us. And it's far more pervasive, far more impactful than we realize. But before I do, let me say a couple of things. First, this is not an anti-smartphone message. I am not advocating that we all get rid of our smartphones. That's not what this is about. This message is for people who, like me, benefit from their smartphones and use it daily. But the hope today is that we would stop and reflect on our phone habits and think about the effect it's having on our lives and in our families. Second, this message is for me. If it feels like I'm preaching at you, I'm not. I'm preaching at me because I need to hear this. That's why I got the book. I got it for me because I saw just how dependent I was on my phone, how often I looked at it, how impulsively I reached for it. And I admit to you today that my phone habits have been largely unchecked, undisciplined, and unhealthy. I can't tell you how many times Gina said to me, "Can you not look at your phone right now? Do you really have to respond right now?" And I needed to hear that. But God has used her in this study to bring some godly conviction and hopefully changes to this part of my life. But in the time remaining, I want to share some of the ways that our phones are changing us. And the first is this: we are becoming addicted to distraction. We are becoming addicted to distraction. The average American checks their phone every 4.3 minutes. That amounts to 224 times a day and 81,000 times a year. We check our phones every 4.3 minutes of every waking day. 224 times a day. That's a lot, isn't it? One of the ways our phone is changing us is that we are finding it increasingly difficult to go without distraction. It's becoming more and more difficult for us to be offline for any amount of time without feeling the effects of withdrawal. And that's why we're constantly unlocking it every 4.3 minutes. That's why we reach for our phones the first thing in the morning, not just to turn off the alarm, but to check social media, to check Instagram, to check our email, to check news, while we're still half asleep. Why? Because we need that hit. We need that digital distraction from the moment we get up in the morning. All of which begs the question, why? Why do we need that hit? Why do we need hit after hit after hit? Why are we constantly looking to be distracted through our phones? There are several reasons why. For starters, to fight boredom. to fight boredom. We in the 21st century have become a people with an aversion to stillness. Would you agree with that? When there's nothing for us to do, we don't know what to do. And so we just grab our phones and start looking at it. I noticed this at Trader Joe's this week. I got to the checkout line, and this was late afternoon. It was busy. The lines were long, and I started looking around, and what I see. What do you think people were doing? A bunch of people were on their phones just scrolling as we were waiting in line. We fight boredom. Another reason we're constantly checking our phones is FOMO, and this is a big one. What's FOMO? The fear of missing out. The fear of missing out. This is actually a brand new entry in the Oxford English Dictionary. FOMO, fear of missing out. Anxiety that an exciting or interesting event may be happening elsewhere, often aroused by posts seen on social media. But FOMO is real. And it's the reason many of us are constantly checking our phones to make sure we're not missing out on anything. I want to see the latest Instagram post. I want to see the latest Facebook post. I want to see the latest news. I want to hear the latest on my favorite team, my favorite celebrity. There's something now called neomania. And neomania is an addiction to anything within the last 5 minutes. I'm not making this up. This is actually a thing. It's a compulsive need to know everything that happens when it happens so that I don't miss out. And here's the last reason I'll share as to why we're addicted to distraction that comes from Blaise Pascal, the 17th century philosopher and theologian who said this while observing the distracted people of his day. He said, take away their diversion and you will see them dried up into weariness. Why? Because they are reduced to thinking of self. I have discovered that all the unhappiness of men arises from one single fact, that they cannot stay quietly in their own chamber. What's Pascal saying? He's saying the reason people seek diversions and distractions is because they need an escape. An escape from the silence and solitude that forces them to come to terms with who they are, that forces them to be alone with their own thoughts. And for a lot of people, that is the last thing they want. In other words, we seek distraction to numb the sting of our emptiness, to divert attention away from the things in our lives that make us unhappy. Author Peter Kreeft said, we think we want peace and silence and freedom and leisure, but deep down we know that this would be unendurable for us. We want to be harried and hassled and busy unconsciously. We want the very thing we complain about. For if we had leisure, if we had space, we would have to look at ourselves and listen to our hearts and see the great gaping hole in our hearts and be terrified because the hole is so big that nothing but God can fill it. And our phones provide endless diversions that keep us from having to see the great gaping hole in our hearts. Anytime I feel bad about anything, all I have to do is grab my phone and start scrolling, and instantly I'm redirected. So we need to be honest about our phone habits. And the first thing we've got to recognize is that we are not victims. Nobody forces us to be on our phones. No, we want to be on them. We want to be distracted. We want to escape. That's the first way our phones are changing us. Here's the second. We crave immediate approval. The second way our phones are changing us is that we crave immediate approval. Essena O'Neill was a 19-year-old Australian model who accumulated over 500,000 Instagram followers. Once poised to make a career from online endorsement deals, she called it quits in 2015, deleting most of her pictures. Why the drastic move? Essena had come to see that her life online was hollow, fake, and self-centered. She said, being born into the screen-dominated age, we are taught to mold ourselves in order to gain the most social validation, likes, views, and followers. I was a living paradox of conditional self-love and constant self-hate. Basically, my self-worth relied on social approval. Asena is an extreme example of the temptation you and I face every day on our phones. Now, we may not have 500,000 followers. Maybe you do. But even if you had 50, even if you had 15, we can obsess over our image just as much, can we not? All for the purpose of gaining the most social validation. The sad truth is that many of us are addicted to our phones because we crave immediate approval and affirmation. And nowhere is this more evident than on social media platforms like Instagram. So let's talk about that. Let's say you post an image, okay, which is usually carefully edited, so it looks nice. But let's say you post an image or you put up a post. What do you do next? You watch for the response, right? You watch for the response, and it's immediate. You can find out immediately if what you posted is gaining the approval of others. How? By their likes. And so you refresh. How many people are liking my post? And you refresh again and again and again. And every time that little heart icon pops up, there's a rush, right? And that rush is real. Guys, listen to this. Every time you get a like, every time that little heart, that orange heart icon pops up, you know what happens in your body? Your brain releases something called dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical in your body, and that's the rush of excitement that you feel. And scientists who have done extensive studies on this topic say that the mini high that you feel when you get a like is similar to your brain on cocaine. Studies have shown that the approval we get on social media affects our brain the same way drug addiction does, which is what reinforces the compulsive behavior. Which is why people post image after image, because they gotta feed that habit. I remember my sister-in-law, Nina, telling us about the conversation she had with her teenage daughters, who told her that there are ways to post on Instagram to get the most likes. Do you guys know about this? That if you post at certain times of the day, you're going to get the most likes, and they vary depending on the day of the week. Monday to Sunday, they have different times, which is crazy to me. But that's how people think today. How do I get the most likes? How do I gain the most social approval? And that's what our phones are doing to us. It's turning us into approval addicts, as if we weren't that already. But more and more, we are deriving our worth, our value, our identity from the approval of others. So if I get a lot of likes, then I feel good. I feel good about myself. If I don't get a lot of likes, then I feel crappy and I kick the dog and yell at the kids. But this craving for human approval, this inordinate desire for recognition and affirmation, is one of the reasons we find it so hard to put our phones away. I want to say one more thing about social media that's fundamentally changing the way we go about our lives, and it's this. It's turning our lives into a stage. It's turning our lives into a stage. Here's what I mean by that. There once was a time when people would do things and then share them. So let's say you go on a trip and you take some pictures and think, hey, I want to share them on Facebook. I want to share some of my experiences with the people in my social network, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those days are gone. Now, it's the anticipated approval that's driving our behavior, that's driving our actions, our decisions. In other words, listen, what's motivating me to go on that trip is the approval I'm going to gain from others when I post those pictures on Facebook. Are you getting me? So we are performers on a stage, carefully crafting our lives before an audience, seeking to impress them and gain their approval. A third way our phones are changing us is in our literacy. Guys, we are losing our literacy. One of the effects of our phone addiction is that we are reading less and less books, and this is a fact. People who spend a lot of time on their phones are reading fewer books. Why? Because our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. You see, our phones are conditioning us to skim rather than read. The never-ending flow of information that we're constantly taking into our phones has taken a toll on our attention spans, resulting in ADD-like symptoms. Is it any wonder why so many people today struggle to read a book? Why we struggle to slow down our pace and read something with intention and care? And nowhere is this more consequential than in the reading of this book. Truth is, a lot of people today struggle to read their Bibles for this very reason, and it makes sense, does it not? Think about it. The more we're constantly feeding ourselves digital junk food, the Bible, reading the Bible, man, it just feels downright boring and inconvenient and far too demanding. Hip-hop artist Trip Lee said this: the more time I spend reading 10-second tweets and skimming random articles online, the more it affects my attention span, weakening the muscles I need to read scriptures for long distances. And he's right. The more time we spend staring into our phones, the less or the more we lose our capacity to stop and read and ponder the deep truths of God revealed in His Word. And as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most detrimental ways our phones are changing us. A fourth way our phones are changing us is this: it's making us lonelier. It's making us lonelier. Loneliness is an epidemic in our nation, in our society. 3 out of 5 people in America today say they're lonely. 3 out of 5. And it's only getting worse. The numbers are only increasing. Now, here's what's interesting. What's interesting is that the smartphone and social media was supposed to be a cure for that. It was supposed to cure our loneliness because we would all be connected all the time and no one would ever be alone. But that is a far cry from what we're seeing. What we're seeing is a nation that is feeling more alone than ever before. Why? Here are some of the main reasons. First, as connected as we are, much of our connections are superficial at best. As connected as we are, we have never been more connected in the history of this world. But most of our connections are superficial. For example, how many of our friends on Facebook are actual friends? Not many, according to a study by Oxford University. It found that of 150 Facebook friends that the average user has, only 15 could be counted as actual friends, and only 5 as close friends. Most of our digital social connections are superficial connections. They don't go past the surface. They're a mile wide and an inch deep. Second, the more time we spend on our phones, the less time we spend interacting in person with others, face to face, which is what we need, which is what you and I were made for. It is not uncommon now to see people interacting more with their phones than with each other, right? How many times have you seen a group of teenagers hang out, but they're all doing what? They're all looking at their phones. Guys, I don't know how many times I've been at a restaurant, and this breaks my heart. How many times I've been at a restaurant and I've seen entire families, parents and kids, eating the entire meal, staring at their phones. Not even engaging each other, not even talking. They're just looking down at their phones while they're eating their meals. But that's what our society has come to. Our phones are pulling us away from real relationships. And the lack of real-world interactions is making it hard, if not impossible, for us to connect with people on a level that allows us to feel seen and heard, known and loved. And third, our phones are exacerbating our loneliness in that it's changing the way we relate to others. It's actually altering the way we interact with other human beings. Clinical psychologist Susanna Flores wrote a book called Facehooked, How Facebook Affects Our Emotions, Relationships, and Lives, and this is what she writes. Studies have shown that we are actually spending less time in each other's presence because online connectivity has convinced us that we've already socialized. In many ways, digital connections appear to be altering our comfort levels with direct and honest communication. Our network life allows us to hide from one another even as we are tethered to one another. We are increasingly avoiding face-to-face conversations. Why? Because we would rather talk than text. That is frightening. That is scary, is it not? Guys, our phones are fundamentally altering the way we relate to one another. And on that note, I want to say a word to parents. Moms and dads whose children have smartphones, listen. The phone is changing your child more than you realize. In the US, 53% of kids have their own smartphones by the age of 11. By the age of 12, more than 69% of kids do. And 95% of teenagers have access to a smartphone. And they are using an average of 6 hours worth of entertainment and social media every day. And it is having a profound detrimental effect on them. Everything from social interactions, just like we talked about, the way they see and relate to people, to their actual brain chemistry. Listen to this. This is crazy. Children who are addicted to their phones have different brains. They have different brains. The region of the brain known as gray matter actually change. They shift in size and shape depending on their social media and entertainment addiction. And the gray matter controls a person's emotion, speech, memory, and self-control, among other things. It's actually changing the physical makeup of their brains, not to mention their functioning, all of which is having a severe effect on their mental health. Oh man, depression, suicide rates among children and teenagers have skyrocketed exponentially since the introduction of the smartphone. Author Gene Twenge writes, it is not an exaggeration to describe the iGen generation, the iPhone generation, as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. Tony Fadell is known as the grandfather of the iPod. He was one of the key players on the original team that designed the actual iPhone, and he is a father of 3, and this is what he said. I wake up in cold sweats every so often thinking, what did we bring into the world? What did we bring into the world? This is why tech giants keep their own kids away from the technologies that they themselves have created or run. Steve Jobs was asked in 2010, so your kids must love the iPad. He responded, they haven't even used it. Google CEO Sundar Pichai has a teenage son. That boy does not own a cell phone. The present CEO of Google, his teenage boy, does not even own a smartphone. And there are a bunch of people like that. You could research it online. These parents, of all people, know the harmful effects of smartphones and their technology, and so they are shielding their kids from it, and moms and dads, so should you. The last thing I'll mention on the ways our phones are changing us is this. It's making us comfortable with our secret vices. It's making us comfortable with our secret vices. In other words, it's making it easier and easier for us to live in deception and sin, specifically as it relates to pornography. Our phones are making porn use a lot more discreet now, giving it space to fester behind the veil of privacy and anonymity. You know, back when I was a teen, if I wanted to look at porn, you know what I had to do? I had to actually go to Thrifties, grab a magazine off a rack when nobody's looking, go off to some faraway aisle where nobody is, tear off a few pages, fold it up, put it in my pocket, and walk out, all while making sure I'm not being detected. Those days are long gone. The smartphone has made every smut you can think of, you can imagine, accessible with the touch of our fingertips. More than 15% of Christian men over the age of 60 admitted to ongoing pornography use. The rate was more than 20% of men in their 50s, 25% for men in their 40s, and 30% for men in their 30s. But nearly 50% of professing Christian men ages 18 to 29 willingly acknowledged ongoing porn use. The survey found a similar trend among women, but in lesser proportions. Guys, listen, if this is you, if you are someone who is viewing porn regularly on your phone, I want to say this. I just want to warn you that what you are doing is catastrophic for your soul. It is catastrophic for your soul. It is doing far more damage to your heart and to your mind, to your relationships than you realize. And listen, what is hidden before men is not hidden before God. Do not assume, listen to me, listen. Do not assume that you can live in sin and indulge in your carnal fleshly desires without consequence. There is no such thing as anonymity before God. 1 Corinthians 4:5 says, all the things that are done in secrecy and darkness will be brought into the light. And every intent of the heart will be disclosed. God's word promises what's done in the darkness will be brought to the light. So in the words of Jesus, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better to lose one eye than to have your whole body thrown into hell. And if your scrolling hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better to lose the capacity to scroll for porn than have your whole body thrown into hell. Sinclair Ferguson said, it is better to enter heaven having decided to never use the internet again rather than going to hell clicking on everything you desire. There's a person at church, at this church, that has done just that. There's a brother here who has struggled with porn for years. He's had a porn addiction. So you know what he did? He got rid of his smartphone. He traded in his smartphone for what he calls a dumb phone. And now all you can do is make calls and text. But I commend him so much for that. I commend him for taking that drastic step to ward off sin and temptation. But guys, these are some of the ways that our phones are changing us. It's making us addicted to distraction. We're constantly wanting distraction, seeking to be distracted. It's making us approval addicts, where we crave social approval. We're losing our literacy. It's making us lonelier and altering the way we relate to people. And it's making us comfortable living with our secret sins. There's no way around it. Our phones are fundamentally and radically changing us. It's impacting us far more pervasively than we realize. And if you are one who sees these changes taking place in your life, if you are one who knows that, man, I've got an unhealthy dependence on my phone, if you are one of the brave souls who will actually admit, I'm addicted to my phone, what can you do? What are some things you can do to break that habit, to break that addiction? Let me close by giving you some practical application, practical steps that you can put into practice to have a healthy relationship with your phone. First, turn off push notifications. Turn off them notifications, guys. Every time your phone pings or beeps or alerts you, you know what it's doing? It's releasing the dopamine. It's triggering the dopamine release in your brain. So turn off those notifications and set predetermined times for when you will check your phone. Second, delete apps. We got so many stinking apps on our phone. Do you really need 15 video games? We have so many apps on our phones. Go through your phones and delete all unnecessary, time-wasting, time-consuming apps from your phone. You can do that if you really want to get a handle on your phone use, phone habits. Third, invite your spouse, your friends, and family members to offer feedback on your phone habits. Invite your spouse, friends, family members to offer feedback on your phone habits. We all need truth tellers in our lives. Ask the people in your life, hey, what do you think about my phone habits? What do you see? What do you see that I may not be seeing? And ask them to be honest with you. Get an outside perspective on your phone habits. Fourth, find an accountability partner. Find an accountability partner. Talk to a friend. Talk to someone in your DC. Tell them about your phone habits. Tell them about your addiction. Tell them about your secret vices that you indulge in on your phones. And share with them your goals. Share with them what you would like to see happen with you and your phone. Fifth and lastly, go on a fast. Go on a fast. One of the most important things you can do to break that habit is to go on a smartphone fast. It could be for a day, 2, a week. A Christian writer named Andy Crouch went on a 40-day fast. He fasted from his smartphone for 40 days, and he said it was so great for him. But he said this, I will say this, FOMO is a real thing. What I was most afraid of missing out on was not information, however, but an affirmation. I discovered how attached or maybe addicted I was to the small daily dose of reassurance that other people like me or follow me. It was sobering how strong the pull was on me. Richard Foster said, of all the disciplines, more than any other discipline, fasting reveals the things that control us. Go on a fast from your phone. Now, you may not choose to go on a 40-day fast like Andy Crouch. Maybe you do, if you're so bold. But it doesn't even have to be that extensive. Maybe start by fasting from your phone for part of a day. Just a part of your day, like when you're at work. So when you go into the office, you don't keep the phone with you. You don't keep it on you. If you want this to work, you got to be physically separate from your phone. So if you can, leave it in the car. Leave it in a drawer. Or simply power off. Now you say, what if my wife or my husband needs to get a hold of me? They can call the office. I know it's hard for us to imagine, but there was actually a time when we didn't have cell phones. So if you wanted to contact your spouse, you actually called the office. If you wanted to talk to your friend, you actually had to call their home on their landline. Remember that? When I was a kid, we had rotary phones, man. You remember those things? That's just crazy to me that you guys don't even know what I'm talking about. And we hated dialing number 9 and the 0 because it would just take forever. Oh, man. But go on a fast. And I would especially encourage you, guys, listen. Go on a social media fast. Fast from social media. Fast from Instagram. Fast from Twitter. Fast from Facebook. These things take up so much of our time. And we squander so much of our time, precious time, on these things, social media. And that's what I'm doing currently. I don't have Facebook. I've got Instagram. But I've been off of it for a couple of months, and it's been so good. It has been so great. Now, am I missing out on things that are happening in people's lives? Sure I am. But what I've gained by being off of it, man, has been so worth it. It has been so good for my soul. And let me say a word to parents as it relates to their children. Moms and dads, please listen. Parents, listen. Be wary of sharenting. Be wary of sharenting. You know what that is? You know what sharenting is? Sharenting is a term for parents who share a lot of things about their kids online. You're parenting, you're sharenting. Here's what I mean by that. Now, before I say, there's nothing wrong with sharing about your kids, right? And most parents do that. Most parents want to share about their kids. That's a natural thing to do. I do that. But we often do it without thinking about it. And without thinking about the effect that it's having on our kids. Here's what I mean. We are the first generation of parents who are raising our children with a camera phone constantly in their faces. Let me repeat that. We are the first generation of parents who are raising our kids with a camera phone constantly in their faces. And we are teaching our children, we are training them to be actors, performers for our phones. And we wonder why they grow up to be obsessed with their selfies. We wonder why they grow up obsessed with their image. They are in many ways living out the patterns and the values that we are instilling in them. Moms and dads, be wary of that. I'm not saying don't ever post about your children, but just be mindful of the things that you do, especially on social media and your children. Now remember that the purpose of a fast, guys, is not just to say no to something, it's to say yes to something else, right? We say no to something good so that we can say yes to something better, like people, like our family, our friends. And here's some things that you can do to give yourself fully, to be fully present with the people in your life. When you come home from work, dads, when you come home from work, mom, put your phone away. Put it away. Put it out of sight. Put it in an entirely different room or power off so that you can be fully present. If you have to check your email, some of you do, designate certain times when you will do that. For example, after the kids go to bed. Implement a no phone policy at the table. This is a big one. Parents, implement a no phone policy. Couples, families, implement a no phone policy when eating. When you're having a meal with your family or friends, agree that you're not going to have your phones with you. You're not going to pull it out. You're not going to check them during the meal. But these are some things that you can implement with the people in your life. Here's the main reason we should fast from our phones. Here's the main reason we should fast from social media, so that we can say yes to God. So that we can say yes to God. So that we can give God our best selves, our full selves, our full devotion. Pastor Ray last week preached in part out of 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul instructs husbands and wives to not deprive each other of sex, but to give themselves fully to the other. But there was an exception. Remember that? It's found in verse 5. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Paul says it's good to fast from sex from time to time. Why? So that you can strengthen your devotion to the Lord. Guys, if there's anything that our phone addictions have done to us as believers, it has weakened or killed our devotion to Christ. If there's anything harmful, detrimental that our phones and our phone habits have done to us as followers of Christ, it has weakened or killed our devotion to Christ. Tim Keller was once asked, why do you think young Christian adults struggle most deeply with God as a personal reality in their lives? And this is what he said: noise and distraction. It is easier to tweet than pray. It is so much easier to tweet or post an image or browse on the internet. It's so much easier to do all those things than labor in prayer. But when you and I neglect prayer, when we forsake time with God, time spent with God, communion with God, what happens? What does that do to us? It makes God feel distant. It makes God seem small. It makes God seem inconsequential. It makes him feel boring. It makes him feel uninteresting. It makes God unimportant. Oh, no wonder the enemy of our souls wants us glued to our phones, because he knows that this thing keeps us away from him. He knows that the more distracted we are on our phones, the less focused we are on eternal things. The more we seek the approval of others, the less we rest on his approval. The more we skim on our phones, the less we read his word. The more we seek to cure our loneliness in digital connections, the less we see that we are already complete in him. The more we indulge in secret sins through our phones, the less we see that the only thing that can satisfy my heart is Christ and Christ alone. And this is where we see the true value of our fast, so that we can feast on the one who alone satisfies the deepest longing of our hearts. John Piper says, if you don't feel strong desires, listen. If you don't feel strong desires for the manifestation of the glory of God, it is not because you have drunk deeply and are satisfied. It is because you have nibbled so long at the table of this world, your soul has sucked all the small things, and there is no room for the great. God did not create you for this. There's an appetite for God, and it can be awakened. I invite you to turn from the dulling effects of food, or in this case, your phone, and the dangers of idolatry, and say with some simple fact, this much, oh God, I want you. And this is what I leave with you today. If your desire for God these days is weak, and some of you, I'm talking to you. For some of you, your desire for God right now is weak. It's a flicker. Some of you right now, under the sound of my voice, you're struggling in your walk with God. Some of you right now are feeling so dry, so barren in your relationship with Jesus. If that is you, I just want to encourage you to turn. Turn from the dulling effects of your phone. Turn from the dangers of idolatry of social media and say to God, I want you. I want you, God. I want you. I want you. And if you can't even say that, and some of you can't even say that honestly, if you can't even say that with honesty and sincerity, say this: I want to want you, God. I want to want you. Because right now I really don't. But I want to want you. I want to want you more than I want the world. God, I want to want you more than I want the things on my phone. I want to want you. Say that to him. And God, in his mercy and his grace, he will come and he will meet you. He will answer you. And let me invite you to do that right now. I just want to invite you to bow your heads and just go before God. I'm guessing that God has spoken to some of you here. Some of us in this room, if we're honest enough, we would say, man, I am overly dependent on my phone. Some of us are in the category of the 75.4% of Americans that say, I'm straight up addicted to my phone. I can't be away from it for any length of time without feeling the effects of withdrawal. I am glued to my phone. And if I'm honest, I know it's hindering my life. It's affecting my life. It's affecting my relationships. It's affecting my work. It's affecting my life far more than I want to acknowledge. If that is you, the Lord is inviting you right now to come and just lay that at His feet. Just come. Lay down your phone at the foot of the cross. Lay down your habits. Lay down your addictions. Lay down your secret vices. Lay them down at the foot of the cross and say, God, help me. I want you. God, I want you. I want to want you. I want to want you more. God, I want to reach for you more than I reach for my phone. God, I want to depend on you more than I depend on my phone. God, I want you. Say that to Him. And some of you, God is calling you to fast. Some of you, God is calling you to fast from your phone. Maybe for a part of a day, maybe for a day, maybe for a couple days. God is calling some of you right now to fast from social media because you're on it way too much. And I say that in love. Fast. Take a break. So that the time that you would have spent on it, you would spend with Christ. Just take this next moment just to go before God. However the Lord is prompting you in your heart, just go and do business with God. What is God prompting you to do? What has God put on your heart to implement with the people in your life and with the Lord? Just commit that before God. Say, God, give me the grace. Give me the grace, God. Help me. Give me the strength to be fully present with my family, with my friends, and God, mostly with you. Commit your ways before the Lord. God, thank you for your love. And God, in your love, you rebuke. And Father, I pray, God, that my friends here would receive it as such. God, that they would hear this as a word of love to those whom you love. God, far too many of us, God, are sacrificing the eternal for the temporal. Far too many of us, God, are squandering the precious time that we have on things that in the end will matter nothing. God, you know where every person is. And you, God, more than anyone, know the true nature of our relationship with our phones. And God, would you just help us? Would you meet us, God, right where we are? God, some of us really are addicted to our phones. We're on it constantly. We impulsively reach for it. God, help us. Father, please, in Jesus' name, would you break our addictions? God, set your people free. Father, I pray that you would set your people free. God, I pray that you would bring freedom to your people. That we will no longer be enslaved to our phones and all that it represents. But God, I pray that you would redirect our hearts and our minds to you, knowing that you are the only one that can give us what we look to our phones to provide. God, you are the only one that can satisfy the deepest longing of our hearts. So God, would you help us? Meet us. Help us, God. For our joy, really for our joy. For the good of the people in our lives. And for the glory of your name. Amen.